Hello and what is up, YouTube? Welcome to week 1, episode 1 of our featured build discussion. Today we'll be taking a look at Hasunic's Scourge Arrow Raider. Of course, all of the information if you want to replicate this build yourself or try it out yourself will be provided down below in the video description, including the path of building, the guide link that we're going to take a look at today, as well as this particular video link showing off an Uber Elder kill. Now, a few things to mind out for if you are new to the channel. You can, of course, like, subscribe, and hit the bell to be notified about more video discussions just like this one. And if you're new, you probably also noticed that there are some timestamps placed above my slightly balding forehead. You can, of course, click on any of those to revisit, review, or jump ahead to any part of the discussion that you would like. And then, of course, there are more links down below in the video description, including an invitation to join our Discord channel, which is free to all users. And if you'd like to say thank you for any of the content that we work on right here in G3, we've also got a Patreon link that you can support as well. So, all that being said, let's take a look first off at some gameplay of what it looks like exactly for this Raider to be fighting the Uber Elder. One of the first things that you will notice whenever you are watching a Scourge Arrow user fight the Elder is most notably Mirage Archer. That is going to be the green-looking ghosty archer that is above the character. That is going to duplicate the particular skills that are being used. And in the case of Scourge Arrow, this is particularly important because, of course, Scourge Arrow scales up its damage with the number of pods that you can fire. You can see right here that our buddy that is doing this build did complete the Uber Elder with 1 death, and I wanted to show off his 1 death right here. But props to this guy because he is taking on the Uber Elder in solo self-found. That's something that I have never done before. So props to him for taking on the Uber Elder. That is the 1 death that he's got. But I wanted to show you off and lead off with some gameplay footage from the get-go, so that way you had an idea of what this particular build looks like and what the gameplay looks like. But of course, this is Uber Elder viable for anyone to play. And of course, if you can do it in SSF, you can certainly do it in Trade League. So, moving on to the guide and the overview, here's Hasunic's Scourge Arrow Raider, his plan for level 1 through 100, and the walkthrough. One of the reasons why I chose this particular build to feature first for our featured build discussion series is simply because build guides need to include explanations in them about what they do. Those of you that have ever seen me preview or show off anyone else's build ever, one of the requirements that I've got is that they've got videos attached to it showing what they can actually do with their build, and that they've got a well-written guide that actually demonstrates exactly what it is that a character is supposed to do and mechanically what's important in upgrading and going about acquiring the different mechanics that you need in order to generate the build as it is presented in its various states. So, first off, he does a great job showing off his current gear of what he's got and what he uses. Of course, he's using a Chin Soul accompanied by a Void Fletcher. These are the uniques that he's using. He's got a wonderful looking ruby ring that is right here, which of course the big feature on this particular Shaper ring is going to be that he curses enemies with level 12 Assassin's Mark on hit. Then he's also using a Mark of the Elder Steel Ring, which is simply fantastic in terms of the amount of damage, life, and energy shield that it gives back. So it's a wonderful, wonderful unique. Again, it's going to be pretty tough to farm that in SSF, but if you're in Trade League, that should be no problem. His helmet looks fantastic. Nothing really out of the ordinary here in terms of a standardized build that's going to need life and resistances. A great spot to get those is, of course, on your helmet if your helmet isn't required as a unique. In the chest slot, he's got a Comb's Heart. Again, this is something that you can target farm in SSF, and Hasunic goes through and actually shows you how you can target farm these various items that you're going to look for. In terms of his amulet, he's got an amulet that has been anointed because he's playing in the Blight League. But then other than that, he's got some global crit on here, as well as some attack damage and maybe some particular attribute stats that are required to level up gems. His gloves are the Breath Stealer unique gloves. His belt is an abyssal, I'm sorry, not an abyssal belt, a Stygian Vise, which has an abyssal socket, which of course, whenever you are playing a Scourge Arrow build, it is important for you to have as many slots as possible for you to stack as much flat damage as possible. So abyssal sockets are fantastic. His boots are once again going to be emphasizing life and resistances and move speed. And then his gems and jewels are going to rotate around, again, Scourge Arrow as the gem, and then Lion Eyes Fall, which we'll take a look at where exactly to place that in a moment when we look at the passive tree. Then he's got multiple different searching eye jewels that give flat life and then damage to attack. Here we've got one that's got a corrupted roll, 10% increased global critical strike chance, and then on his last one he's got life and again flat damage to bow attacks. So that's the overview of his particular gear, and again, not all of that is going to be required to get this particular build going. So here's his introduction to his build guide. So in 3.8, I want to league start with a Deadeye Ranger. I will use Rain of Arrows and transition into Tornado Shot when I get better equipment or late game or more added arrows. I will introduce a plan to self-grind all the needed divination cards to transition into late game gear, which bases I want to chance, the overall leveling tree, and how it will shape my atlas to be able to self-grind all of the divination cards while still sustaining maps. I will make my own filter blade and share it later, which, yes, he's got that included in the build, so if you're looking for the specific exact things that to look to chance that he chanced, you can do that as well. Now, lastly, he says that he's also going to use the blacksmith stone plus weapon plus magic plus rare rustic sash recipe for a good way to get good high early physical damage weapons. A lot of players don't realize that there are vendor recipes that are actually quite strong, whether you're playing in Trade League or SSF, that can make sometimes things that you're just not getting to drop or you're just not getting to craft very well, you can simply go trade with a vendor in order to acquire some upgrades. So I love build guides like this that help especially newer players who are coming to look at a build guide feature and say, hey, can you walk me through exactly how you replicate this particular build as seen in the video? And he does a great job of explaining that. Now, his leveling links are on display, which again for me is always a requirement because players need to know how to start off early on and transition, because so often in Path of Exile an endgame version of a build looks nothing like the build, or maybe only slightly resembles something like the build that a player will use while they are leveling through the 10-act story of Path of Exile. Here he's got a detailed guide on how exactly to acquire each of these uniques that he's got listed. So often players will look at a solo self build, a solo self-found build, and say, oh, that doesn't interest me at all because I play in a trade league. Well, it might be that it's more lucrative in a trade league to simply trade for something. But if you know how to target farm something, and it's therefore very lucrative to trade for it, this means you can also be using these various tricks to farm up those particular items and then sell them off yourself. So whether you're playing in an SSF league or in a trade league, either way, this can be incredibly helpful information for you. And this particular build guide does a great job of showing off how exactly to acquire all of these various particular uniques that are needed. Lastly, he does show off his filter right here, and he's got the leveling tree that we're going to take a look at right now on his path of building. So let's take a look at his path of building together. A couple of things to note here. Yes, he's gone Raider. First off, he's got Quartz Infusion, which gives 40% increased elemental damage, as well as 10% chance to dodge attack hits. And then you also have phasing while you're at maximum frenzy charge, and you have phasing during onslaught. Now, this is incredibly important when you're looking at things like his Abyssal Jewels that give him, well, a chance for onslaught on kill. It's really helpful. He's also got Avatar of the Veil, 10% increased movement speed while phasing, immune to elemental ailments while phasing, which means you don't have to dedicate a flask to remove burning or removing freeze. That's great. And 10% chance to dodge spell hits while phasing, which that's just fantastic. Now, nearby enemies also have fire, cold, and lightning exposure while you have phasing, which applies a minus 15% to those resistances. That is a ton of resistance shred that is simply built in. And then, of course, nearby enemies have 15% less accuracy rating while you have phasing. Essentially, anything that does get close enough to you has got a much greater chance to miss you because of their accuracy rating, because you're always going to have phasing up. He also has Way of the Poacher, which gives a bunch of attack speed as well as frenzy charge generation, as well as maximum frenzy charges. And then he's got Avatar of the Slaughter, which of course is just a bunch of steroids for your various frenzy charges. Now, speaking of frenzy charges, he does grab a couple of frenzy charge slots. So you start out over here on the Ranger tree. You're going to come up, grab Heart of Oak, of course, for some maximum life generation, but then you're going to work your way around to things like Winter Spirit for cold damage, all the way down to lethality, again, for your damage with your bows, coming all the way down to Fangs of the Frost, again, damage with weapons penetrates cold resistance because we're going to be stacking a whole bunch of cold damage. Eventually, you're going to work your way over and grab Golem's Blood for a bunch of life. You're going to grab Bravery, again, for life, and then you're going to work your way through the rest of these damaging trees, including Primeval Force, which gives you weapon damage, elemental penetration, that essentially negates whatever resistance is. Wow, I can't say that word. Whatever resistance is that your enemies that are close to you, if they're still alive, would potentially have. Working your way up to grab some Frenzy Charge. Some additional maximum frenzy charges with Fervor, grabbing also abyssal slots that are needed. Eventually, you're going to grab acrobatics and phase acrobatics because why would anything want to hit you anyway? And then you're going to max out the rest of your maximum frenzy charges as well as grab some more life. Now, earlier I had mentioned something about Lionized Fall. This is an incredibly important spot. For Lionized Fall, what it reads is this: melee and melee weapon type modifiers in radius are transformed to bow modifiers. So what that means is as you slot this particular gem, Lionized Fall, into this particular slot on the right-hand side of the passive tree right above acrobatics, it means that this entire wheel that says claw stuff, that includes attack damage leech as well as a whole bunch of additional attack speed and crit strike multi and crit strike chance, all regularly applying to claws. Once you socket in Lionized Fall Viridian Jewel, all of these now apply, instead of to claws, they apply to bows, which means a whole bunch of extra leech and a whole bunch of extra crit chance and crit multi. This is a really, really awesome tree. When you look at it, it's primarily focused on really getting the most out of its damage. You can see a whole bunch of damage nodes that are here, but if you'd rather transition this into something more of a defensive tree, you could do this. You could spend a whole bunch of points. Really, it's not many. It's about 12 points to come up and grab this whole Scion Life Wheel near Constitution. It's something that you could do. You're not that far away from it if you'd rather transition this build into a more defensive-oriented build. When you look at the itemization that he's presently got set up, he's got a grand total of 5,300 life. And that's not a terrible amount when you really think about it, because most stuff isn't going to hit you, and the most deadly stuff in the game, as we all know, are one-shot mechanics. And so if you can keep those one-shot mechanics very far away from you because you're using Scourge Arrow and blowing things up at the end of your screen, well, that means it's not going to get close to you. It's going to be dead anyway. So this is what his passive tree looks like in the POB. One of the things that I love about his POB is his POB includes his itemization. Again, so if you want to make some transitions or some changes to any of the items, you can do that. If you want to search up and say, well, I don't have a Comb's Heart yet, or I don't have a Chin Soul yet, or I don't have a Mark of the Elder Ring yet. How are these other options that I've got and these other items that I potentially can acquire, how are these going to play into this path of building? You can do that because he's already built in all of the various items that are required for the build or suggested for the build. Lastly, the thing that I love is that he's got all of his various skill gem setups. Some path of buildings out there simply miss out on this, and they'll only include like their primary DPS. He's got everything on here. He's got his Vol Grace setup, his Hatred setup, his Steel Skin and cast when damage taken. He's got, of course, his Blink Arrow and Herald of Ash setup, and then he's got his Herald of Ice, Precision, and Summon Ice Golem. By the way, if you're wondering how he fits all of these different reservations in, take a look at the Precision right there. Precision is only at level 1. Lastly, of course, he's got his Scourge Arrow set up, and here's the links for his Scourge Arrow. He's got Scourge Arrow linked with Mirage Archer, added cold damage, infused channeling, elemental damage with attacks, and ice bites. Now, this by no means means that you have to go with these particular links. Of course, sometimes it's more difficult to color things the colors that you need, and so there are some other options out there. Maybe you'd want to change something, maybe like, let's say, increased critical multiplier. If instead of a fourth green slot, you got a second blue slot. Or let's say you got a second red slot instead of a fourth green slot. Well, maybe you would include damage on full life, right? There are options for you depending on how you roll. And that's one of the things that I love about Hasunic's Scourge Arrow Raider build. He's got lots of different options, lots of different ways that you could play off this build as you choose to level this build and as you choose to shape it into your own build. Well, that's the build guide, and that's our first featured discussion for a build. If you've got any comments or suggestions for how you would choose to play this particular Scourge Arrow Raider, drop us a comment down below. Raider got a little bit of a tweak during 3.8, and of course it's got more tweaks and more updates coming when 3.9 drops, so feel free to drop your own comments down below. You could of course play this not as a Raider, and several other players have made build guides for how to maximize Scourge Arrow with different ascendancies. Whether that's with Pathfinders in order to maximize their flask effectiveness, or whether that's with Deadeyes to take advantage of Tailwind. Some players have even played as a Shadow and played as Trickster or even as Assassin to really scale up their poison on the Scourge Arrow. So lots of different options for you as you take a look at Hasunic's Raider Scourge Arrow. I hope that today is the day a Mirror of Calandra drops for you. Thanks for watching that video. If you'd like more information on any of our discussion points today, you can see them down below in the video description. If you'd also like to join our Discord or support our Patreon, you can do so with the links down below. Thanks again, and big shout out to all of our Patreon supporters.